The Story of Mickia Elmore, written by Gregory Huffman, read by Tiffany Simmert. This is the story of the only girl I have ever loved. She had probably more influence on my life than anyone else. Had I not known her, I would have probably been a completely different person, for better or worse. This is the most personal story I have, and also the most important story I have ever written, or told. 2001, Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm 14 and I received my first kiss at a skating rink after asking out my first girlfriend, which I wrote on a card since I was too shy to say it in person. It was nothing special, just a peck on the lips, and to be honest, I don't even think I enjoyed it all that much, but it felt wonderful to finally get physical affection from a female. The following week, she breaks up with me, because I'm too shy, I think she said was the problem. I felt kinda bummed, but it wasn't like I became attached within a week. This isn't the girl this story is about. So I go over to my friend Mickia Elmore's house because at the time we used to play Nintendo 64 a lot at his house. During the very short time I was with my first girlfriend, his sister, Mickia, started flirting with me, trying to kiss me, and whatnot. I told her I had a girlfriend at the time, and I wouldn't cheat, and I have never cheated on a girlfriend to this day. On her. I had known her and her brother for about 2 years at this point, and while I never hung out with her aside from a few times, she used to lay in my lap as we played Nintendo 64. I did meet her first, and she introduced me to Brandel. Approximately 1999, I was walking through the trailer park, where I used to live, and this girl who had just recently moved in stopped me. She asked me where I was going. I told her I was heading to my house, and she asked, "Can I come?" Seemed kinda weird, but I told her she could. So we went through the woods to my house. There, my friend Doug was playing my PlayStation. I assumed I introduced them, and we chatted about something, but eventually she went to go get her brother. So he shows up, and he's one weird dude. He has an afro-esque, poofy hairstyle, and it looks like he's wearing lipstick. When they leave, my friend Doug says, referencing Brandel, "What the fuck was that?" or something like that. One interesting tidbit of info before I continue to the most pertinent part of the story. After a few months, maybe weeks, of me meeting them, Mickia tried to play with my Cocker Spaniel Max, who didn't like strangers. He bit into her cheek, and she ran throughout the house, with blood pouring from her mouth. Later I jokingly called her Triple M Max Mouth Mickia. So anyways, after I break up with the first girl, or rather she breaks up with me, I go over to Brandel's house to play games with him. Mickia starts flirting with me again, but despite me being single, I don't go for it. It's hard to recall exactly why I didn't, because I know I felt lonely back then, but maybe it was just shyness. I have a bad problem with social anxiety, so it's hard for me to deal with situations that make me feel vulnerable around people. Well, I think I was just looking for an excuse to get her to kiss me, so I didn't have to open up. She asked me, "So are you still dating that one girl?" And I say, "No." She leans in to kiss me, and this time I don't stop her. So, I started visiting Brandel more often, and one thing I forgot to mention was the fact that I moved out of the trailer park not long after I met them. So, now I'm actually riding a bike like 20 minutes out to go see them. Mickia starts putting her head on my body at different places, joking about finding the most comfortable place to put her head, until she gets to my penis. This is amazingly sexy to me because at the time I was very unpopular at school, and girls weren't into me, and here this girl is already getting dirty with me. We also sneaked kisses while Brandel and I were playing games together. At one point he said, "I saw that." One time, I went in to try to get a French kiss, which I had never done before. and was nervous about trying, but as soon as I was reaching my tongue out, she had already pulled back from the peck. She must have seen this, because immediately came around and gave me my first ever French kiss, and it was incredible. From then on, we French kissed all the time. One day, we make this kind of date plan, where we will go to a skate rink where I met my first girlfriend. It'll be me, her brother Brandel, my friend Mickey, and Mickey's sister. Mickey is talking to her about being with me, and she basically came out and said she'd be willing to have sex with me. This made me feel good about myself, but it also made me very nervous. I admit, I can be a big pussy about stuff like this. The idea of sex made me feel naked and vulnerable. What if I did it wrong? What if I wasn't good? I also found out something kind of disturbing. See, I assumed she was 13 years old, but she wasn't. She was 10. Insane, isn't it? I found out more news. I thought she was a virgin still too, but she wasn't. She had already had sex with my friend Mickey. Here's another interesting tidbit of info. Mickey comes to me one day, probably a few months before me and Mickia get involved, and tells me he has lost his virginity. I don't remember if I even took him seriously, but I said, "Awesome, let's go tell Brandel." And he sounds reluctant to go tell Brandel about it. At the time, I thought it was because he didn't want to spread a bunch of lies to everyone, but now I think it's kind of funny. So, Mickey and I think his older sister, she's a month older than me, I believe, go into the woods to talk about stuff. He kind of talks me into this deal where we take turns having sex with Mickia, and I kind of accepted it. And I'm not sure why at the time. I guess I just wanted to have sex and lose my virginity. I didn't think past that. So we went back to his house, and Mickey's sister goes and talks to Mickia. She comes back and is kind of laughing and says, "She thinks you guys are in love." That made me feel like a total douchebag. We finally head off to the skating rink. I think I bought everyone a slice of pizza to eat, and told them they owed me for it except for Mickia. But to this day, I don't think the assholes ever paid me back. Well, I was new to dating, and to be honest, Mickia and I weren't officially dating. So I started hugging up on my ex-girlfriend's sister who was there. We did this just as friends. I didn't think it was a big deal at the time. But Mickia was pissed about it, and told Mickey's sister that she was over me. I tried to apologize the whole night, but she would have none of it. When we went home, I spent the night at Mickey's house. I think that was the first night I ever truly cried. That's when I first cried because I knew I was in love, and I fucked it up. The next morning, Mickey and I go to hang out in the woods. Over a period of time, we had built kind of a clubhouse over there, complete with a couch and bed. Mickia met us out there, but she wouldn't talk to me again. I think her and Mickey started flirting, which hurt my feelings. So I went to leave and started crying again. As I was leaving, Mickey tried to stop me from leaving, saying he would just stop. But I had to go home. The one great thing in my life was gone. I should say, a lot of the things about the story are hard to keep in chronological order. And in fact, some of what I'm saying may have happened a little differently than I remember. So it's really hard to remember what exactly happened next. Somewhere around this time, summer hit, and I used to visit my father, wherever he was living, for 3 months. He moved a lot, so I got to visit a lot of spectacular places. Last year is San Diego, California, and this year is Albuquerque, New Mexico. I dyed my hair blonde for the first time on this vacation. So anyways, I went back to Tennessee. I was living on the Knoxville border. But Mickia and Brandel were living on the other side, in Maynardsville, Tennessee. For those of you who have seen Inglourious Bastards, that's where Lieutenant Aldo Raine is from. So one day I head back to the trailer park. Mickia is there, and she says I look silly with my blonde hair. and told me I should dye it pink. This isn't really pertinent to the story, but this is when she started talking to me again, I believe. A few days later, maybe weeks, hell, maybe a month, I can't remember the shit. She's hanging out with a friend. As we're all talking, we both look at each other and kiss. Her friend asks, "Do you guys know each other?" Our response, "No." Something I forgot to mention. Not long after we first broke up, I moved further away from the trailer park. We bought a house that was an hour-and-a-half walk from it, and Mickia used to brag about how much I loved her because I would walk so far to see her every day. Another detail I didn't mention was that she talked me into going to church with her. While I was religious at the time, I just really wanted to be with her. They got mad about us sitting together, so sometimes she would sit in front of me and we would stick our hands out the window of the bus so we could hold each other's hand. Anyway, we kind of started a trend of breaking up and getting back together. This happened a lot. I think it was her nice way of not cheating on me. I think she would break up with me, then fuck some guys, then get back with me, and never fuck me. Granted, it was my fault. I never asked for sex. I was too much of a coward. I just really loved being with her. But I also wanted to make love to her too. Seems kind of corny, but I really didn't want to have sex with her for pleasure. I just wanted to know what it would feel like, to share a vulnerable, intimate moment with each other, going slow and looking into each other's eyes. In around October, still 2001, an interesting situation came up. We weren't dating at the time, and Mickia, her, me, and this other guy were all in the woods. Somehow I think Mickia talked her into having sex with me, since I was too chicken shit. She said she would, but only if they were around. I don't know what that was about, but she later told me that she didn't want to have sex with me because she loved me, which totally fucking blew my mind. Well, we stripped down somewhat, and I pulled down my pants, the first time I had ever done this in front of a woman, and I got on top of her. I should note that the guys were actually kind of keeping guard, so not really within view. It's not like I exposed myself to everyone. Anyways, I couldn't get it up, and she wasn't helping. I went to French kiss her, and she bit my tongue so hard it hurt for a week after that. Did I tell you she was crazy? She had actually randomly attacked me on various occasions without any provocation. Well, it didn't work out, so she got dressed and went home. Cute, corny tidbit here. After visiting her, I would sit on the steps of the church, waiting for my mother and stepfather to pick me up. While I was sitting there, I would pray to God, begging him to let us work, because I loved her so much. Every time I did this, shit seemed to get worse. So maybe this helped lead me to become an atheist. Well, shit did get worse. This guy who used to go to church with us sometimes. Not the church, I said. This guy who used to go to church we went to sometimes would make fun of me for being with her. Ironically, it turns out, not long after he said this to me, he went and had sex with her. Brendale once told me that irony was God's joke on humanity. He said that Mark Twain had said that, but I looked it up and found no such quote. That really hurt my feelings. I felt crushed. I loved her so much. I was taught you only had sex with those you love. But she was fucking other people, because she loved me too much to have sex with me. Things got even worse after that. Turns out while I was on my summer vacation, she was sleeping with a guy I had met when we were first together. This wouldn't have been so bad, except she had gotten pregnant. 2 days ago I was telling the story to a girl I just met on Facebook, because I was half asleep and she was interested in my story. So, I finally spent about 6 hours telling her the whole thing, which if I were sober, Me being half asleep is about the same as me being drunk. I wouldn't have felt comfortable doing that. Anyways, not to go off on a tangent, but she asked me if I could change anything about what had happened back then. Would I? I said, not anymore. You see, at the time, I was jealous. I loved her so much. I wanted to be the father of the baby. I imagined us happy together, raising a kid together. It seemed romantic. I would feel love. I would feel loved. I would feel like I was a part of something special. Now I realize that would have been a worse predicament if it were mine. Last I heard, she was still trying to get child support from the guy. As it was, I held her in my arms despite the fact she was swollen pregnant with another man's child, and it didn't change the fact that I loved her. Last day of 2001, I go with my friend Joe, rest in peace, to a New Year's Eve party. He would always take me to parties, and I would always hate going because I don't like being around people. I guess I just got so bored being alone I would go anyways, even though I knew it would suck. Anyways, while bored to shit there, I noticed Mickia was at the party. Apparently her brother, not Brandel, but her other brother, was dating the girl who lived there, so she tagged along. She danced with me there. It was the first time I had danced with a girl before, but when I went in to kiss her, her brother pushed me. He didn't like me dating her, so we went upstairs to hang out up there. The countdown started, and we kissed at midnight 2002. From 2002 on, the story is mostly lost to me, but I remember a few sweet moments we had, though. She had come down with this cold and told me not to kiss her, and I said, I don't care, you're worth it to me. And the next day she called me and I told her I had gotten sick. So she said, I told you, to which I responded, it was still worth it. I also didn't tell her I loved her until 2002, I think. One time, we were talking on the phone, and as we were getting off the phone I thought her say, as I was putting the phone down. I quickly picked the phone back up and said, What did you say? She laughed and said, Never mind, and I said, No, tell me. I didn't hear you. She said, I love you, and I responded, I love you too, and we hung up. By summer 2003, I was tired of the bullshit. My father was living in Fort Worth, Texas, my hometown, so I moved there permanently. What I did wasn't really a nice thing, as we were dating at the time, but I moved there without calling her and telling her I was leaving. She usually called me because her parents hated me. One tidbit I forgot to mention was that when we had gotten together for the first time, we were getting back from a walk, and she gave me a big kiss before going inside, and her dad saw it and told me I wasn't welcome back. From then on, we had to hide seeing each other, so we would only meet at church or in the woods. Well, once I got to Texas, I called her house and reached her other brother, and he said that she wasn't staying there anymore, so I never called again. The whole time I was in Texas, I never dated. I came close once, but I didn't really like the girl, so it didn't pan out. I didn't even kiss a girl while there. 2006 hits, about April, and I miss Mickia. I had been thinking about her a lot. You know, they say you never really appreciate something until it's gone. But really, I think we only remember the good aspects. Sometimes you get it back and realize it really wasn't that great. I realize Brandel uses the internet a lot, so I Google his name, and I find some aliases of his. I search those, and I come across his email. I email him, and a few days later I get a response. He tells me about how his life is going, and then we start talking on AIM. Well, the story isn't about him, so he gives me Mickia's AIM account, and he says she doesn't get on there often. A few days later, I am on the internet, and pop, She appears online. I message her, "Hey." She responds with a greeting of her own. I say, "Guess who?" And she asks who it is. I say, "Greg." Right away she knows who it is and says, "I miss you." We start talking on the phone and I find out she has a boyfriend she wants to get married to. They met 5 months ago. I tell her that's a little soon to think about marriage. At some point, I kind of start pushing for us to possibly get back together. But she said that there was no more us, which was understandable because I up and left her, and she finally moved on. This was the first time she loved a guy more than me, and I always imagined her wanting to be back with me if we ever made contact again. In fact, I think back in 2002 she had told me she wanted to marry me, so it kind of hurt knowing she didn't feel that way anymore. At one point, she started a 3-way telephone conversation involving her boyfriend, herself, and I ended up cursing him out and hanging up the phone. It was the first time I had ever had such a reaction. Regardless, she still wanted to see me again, so I made plans to go back to Tennessee. I had gotten pretty fat after I left Tennessee in 2003. I had gone up to about 220 to 230 pounds by the beginning of 2006. I had tried to lose weight a few times, but done so unsuccessfully. However, before I went back to Tennessee, I wanted to look good for Mickia, so starting right after I talked to her for the day, I left. I walked every single day, like 3 times a day, and each walk was an hour long. I would just walk around this little closed store sometimes. I started drinking only diet drinks and healthy food and probably only took in about 1,000 calories a day. I dropped down to 185 pounds by the time I had arrived. I even took pictures every month, documenting my process. Sometimes love can be a good and strong motivating factor for success. Sometime between July 16th and 18th of 2006, my stepbrother and I head out there to stay with my stepfather. But he is just visiting, whereas I am moving down there to stay. As we are picking up Brandel, Mickia, and her boyfriend drive by us, and we all stop. She runs over to me and hugs me. It was a great moment. When we got back to the place, Brandel and I immediately headed off on a walk to his friend's house. Let's just fast forward to the fun part. The story is kind of a side story, which has nothing to do with Mickia at first, but is interesting nonetheless. It's dark out as we leave Brandel's friend's house, so we decide to find a place to sleep. Brandel has a plan. There is a used car lot nearby we can sleep at by climbing into the car for the night, or we can find a better place to stay. We will decide this by flipping a quarter. Heads for the car lot, tails for other. It landed on heads, so we scout the place for a decent car. It's a very spooky place. So we say, fuck the quarter, and keep trucking. We come to a church. We try to pass out on the front steps of it, but it's uncomfortable. Luckily, Brandel notices a side door, and it's unlocked. We go inside the church, and Brandel puts his personal belongings down on the table or something in the main room. We search the adjacent rooms and find pillows. We notice a basement, and the basement has the only window in the entire church, which becomes important fast, because as soon as we go down to investigate, a cop drives by. Brandel looks straight at the cop, and later told me the cop looked straight at him, so he says fuck it, and opens the door and goes right up to the cop and starts talking. He tells the cop the whole story, and explains that the door was unlocked and we weren't breaking in. We were just looking for a place to stay. Brandel tells me that he always has good luck, and I always tell him that I have bad luck, but on this day, his luck prevailed. The cop checked our IDs and gave us a ride home. I should note, This was my first day back, and I had actually forgotten the way back to my house. Also of note, Randall had asked his parents earlier if I could stay at his house, to which they replied, no. Well, that didn't stop us from deciding to just have the cop drop us off at his house anyway. Randall decided some espionage-style shit was in order, and had me climb through the window, with the ladder that was outside. While inside, his sister started talking to him from her room. I guess they have thin walls. She asks, "When will you see Greg again?" or something to that effect, and I come up with a plan. He walks into Micah's room with me hiding behind him and does a ta-da style introduction for me, which results in her running over to me and giving me a huge hug. He then goes back to his room, and we spend the rest of the night talking. We then start flirting, and then we start making out. She tells me that even though she is with the other guy she wants to marry, that this just feels right. We pass out, with me holding her in my arms. The first time I ever literally slept with a girl. I wake up and hear a lawnmower. It's her mother outside. I quickly sneak over to Brendell's room, and he is sleeping nude. I wake him up eventually, and we hear people outside. He says we might as well tell his mother I had to stay due to circumstances. As soon as we walk outside, she is furious. She always seemed like a real bitch to me. One time I called Brendel, and she told me to never call her house again. Anyways, she asked where I slept, and Brendel said I slept in his room. There was one problem, though. Brendel didn't lock his door, and his mother came in his room while he was asleep. And of course I wasn't there, so he says, "Greg slept on the floor, in Micah's room." Well, that went over well, as one might imagine. An obvious bullshit lie like that would, and she starts saying how his father's gonna kick my ass or something. We decided to do some chores for her, in hopes that she would calm down, and I guess it went pretty well, as I didn't get my ass kicked when his father came home. In fact, he gave me a ride back to my house. August 10th, 2006. I'm applying at places to find some work. I also tried this new energy drink, soft drink hybrid called Vault. I'm OCD and I just like mentioning impertinent details. Later that night, I went to Brendel's house. We have this plan to camp just outside his house. Well, when I get there, his parents bitch about it, so it doesn't work out, and I don't have a ride home. I pretend I do, and Micah and I make plans to meet outside when her parents go to bed. As I perambulate the area outside of her house, it starts to rain. Sounds retarded, but I even think I begged God for me and Micah to finally make love that night, as I walked in the rain. I had earlier told Micah on the phone that I didn't want to have sex when she was still with that guy, and I wanted it to be special when it happened. Oh, I didn't mention, she had broken it off with that guy. Finally, I saw a flashlight. Micah was in a coat and came down to meet me. We walked and talked for a bit, and we grabbed each other and kissed as the rain fell on us. I don't remember if it was that romantic of a moment or not, but I remember I was just glad to kiss her while she wasn't with that other guy. She decided to sneak me into her house again, as I had done the previous time. But this time, I was even more nervous about it, and I get nervous very easily. We went to her room, and due to our clothes being soaking, was a good excuse to strip down. She had nothing but a shirt on, and she climbed into her bed while I only had my underwear on. Now I know everybody gets nervous on their first time, but this time, the sex wasn't what made me nervous. It was the fact that her parents would effing kill me if they discovered us. I crawled on top of her and we kissed a little. Then I took her shirt off, and now she was fully nude. I kind of gave her the signal that I wasn't quite erect yet, and she asked, "Do you need some help?" I sat back and slipped my underwear off, and she leaned forward on her bed and started gazing down at me. I couldn't feel a thing because I was so nervous, but it looked fucking amazing. In my head I was thinking, holy fucking shit, I'm actually getting a blowjob. After a while, she wanted me to continue on to penetration, so I crawled back on top of her and immediately went flaccid again. She started sucking on me again, and I tried again for sexual intercourse, but no dice. She tried to mount me, in hopes that that would work, to which it didn't. She then asked me if I had erectile dysfunction. I told her I just didn't feel comfortable, because I was in an unwelcome house. We sat and talked for a while, played around, and did a little groping. She got up and went to the mirror, and I followed her, rubbing my penis up against her butt. I held her and rubbed her around her body, but felt too shy still to touch her near her breasts. So she put her hands on mine and led me there, and I squeezed her breasts. Mood-killing tidbit. When I stood up, I felt something warm on my penis. I looked down and the dog had just licked my penis. So technically, I got 2 blowjobs in one night. Yeah, it was kinda gross. Weird. But it's not like I put peanut butter on my dick and led him to it. Well, eventually we got back on the bed, and I was able to calm down enough to get my penis erect. I crawled on top of her, and we started going at it. I heard her say something to the effect of, "I can't believe we waited 5 years for this." Now, without proper context, that would have seemed pejoratively. But she meant it in a good way, and it made me feel good. She made the sexiest noise when I first put my penis into her. I can't even explain it. It was like a moan and a very low but high-pitched voice, but it turned me on so much. And then she would kiss my bicep as I made love to her. Her bed wasn't very stable, and I kept slamming into the wall. Luckily, she had music on loud, so I guess nobody would notice how noisy we were. At one point, her speakers were rocking back and forth. It looked like they might fall over. She scratched my back to hell, and I had marks the next day, but I found it arousing. I kept trying to get her to look into my eyes, but she would only glance and look away. I tried going slow a few times, but she didn't seem to enjoy it as much, so usually I just went faster. I eventually got tired, but she didn't seem to enjoy it as much. I eventually got tired and asked her if she wanted to be on top, but she said her vagina went dry, so we stopped. I didn't orgasm, but I still loved it. She said we lasted for an hour and a half. We got dressed, and she brought me some Kool-Aid, and she lied down on my lap. She had school the next morning, so I had to go. I had brought a camera, and we took a few pictures from the day I lost my virginity, and I snapped one before leaving of her, and then I left. While she was 16 at the time, and I was 19, what happened was not illegal. There was a 4-year law in Tennessee. So long as the age difference is less than 4 years apart, it's legal to have sex with an underage girl. Next month, I think, was when I got the pictures developed, and I loved being able to look at her in those pictures. The only thing I was upset about was that I let Brendel take a picture of us, and it turned out very crappy. It was way too far back, and everything looked dark. Wait, there was one very important detail I forgot to mention. As I left her house, her dog followed me. I walked for 4 hours in the rain, wearing soggy clothing. My toes had become waterlogged, sore, and were bleeding. At about 6 a.m., I reached the place where one of my friends was working with his uncle, and I passed out in the car. The dog had followed me the entire trip. His uncle gave me a ride home, and I went to sleep at my friend's house. I woke up, and my stepfather was telling me about her mother calling, leaving threatening phone messages. The dog was gone, and unless they got it back, they would take legal action. That scared me at the time, because I didn't know about the 4-year law. So I thought that would come up. Luckily, they found the dog, and all was well. Of course, now they hated me even more, if that was possible. October 8th, 2006. I'm going to Micah's friend's house to meet them both. As soon as I step on the porch, Micah gives me a running hug so hard, I nearly fall right off of it. I go inside, but the father is mad he wasn't given warning of me coming to visit, so he takes Micah and I to her house. Well, that doesn't sound too pleasing. So as soon as we reach her house, I step out of the car and walk down the street at the end of her driveway. After a good while, I see her coming down to meet me, and we go off to another of her friend's house, a guy that owns a ranch with horses. Micah's mom starts driving down there, so they hide me in a small barn house. Espionage again. When she leaves, Micah decides she wants to ride a horse and asks if I'll ride with her. Normally I'd be too much of a pissy to do this, but I wanted to have something to remember with her, so I agree. It was pretty fun, I must admit, but I actually fell off the horse later. I wasn't hurt. Then we went to the creek to hang out there. A prophetic tidbit I forgot to mention. I told the guy, I think his name was Ray, that I was glad everything had gone okay, to which he replied, "Well, the day isn't over." It started getting dark. We head back to her house. I come in the back door, and Brandel says in a very spooky tone, "Dude, you aren't welcome here." He didn't say it in the way that he was implying he didn't want me over, but he said it as a warning to me. We went outside, and I had planned to spend the night in the woods behind their house, and then they could meet me in the morning. However, Micah wanted me to sleep in her room, and she had a very sexy-looking shirt on too, so I couldn't turn her down. We went to her room, and I think to avoid making noise, I didn't quite close the back door all the way. This became important very soon. She locks the door of her room, and quickly somebody comes and tries to open it. I hear a voice, "Micah, open this door." At first I thought it was her brother Brandel because it sounded just like him. However, it wasn't. It was her father, and he knew I was in there. I started to back into the closet, but it probably wouldn't have done any good. I was scared shitless, and then something interesting happens. The very dog that had caused me so many problems months ago pressed on the back door. The back door swings open, and the dog runs outside. The father goes to get his car keys to chase after the dog, and as soon as he does so, Micah looks right at me and says, "Greg, run." I pulled out both doors like a bat out of hell. As I'm running down the street, I see the dog running in front of me, and I notice lights catching up to me. Her dad stops the car, gets out, and I'm standing by the dog. I start apologizing to him, and he says, "Well, at least help me get the dog." I shoo the dog over to him, and he puts the dog in the car. Then, he probably woke up the whole neighborhood. "You are one lucky motherfucker. I was gonna kick the shit out of you if you ever come around here again." And the whole time he is saying this, I keep saying, "I'm sorry, sir." He eventually drives back, and I'm walking home again. 4 hours later, I get to my friend's work, or I should say, his former work site, as he isn't working there anymore. That means I have to keep walking. Not much longer, a cop stops me. This scares me because I think that they called the cops on me. They have me empty my pockets, and then they start verbally harassing me. They asked me if I smoked pot, to which I replied that I didn't. They said to me, "You didn't complete high school, did you?" To which I replied that I had. They checked my ID, and when I was cleared, they offered me a ride home. I had them drop me off at an abandoned farmhouse my stepfather had just moved away from. I had various reasons for doing this. One of them was probably the fact my friend I was rooming with did a lot of drugs and had druggy friends over, and I didn't want to get him, and possibly us, into trouble. That night, I walked up to this place we called the Mountain because my stepfather left a tent up there, and I slept inside of it. The following morning, I took another 4-hour walk into Fountain City where my roommate was living. When we got back, they asked me what the fuck had happened, and I said, "Man, it was so fucking crazy. I don't even want to talk about it right now." I didn't tell the story to them until like a month later, just because I was so shaky about the whole thing. One day, my stepfather comes into the house. I think it was the same day as the release of the PlayStation 3. He says, "We have to get going. The cops will be here soon." And I'm like, what the fuck? Apparently Mickia had run away from home, and I was the assumed culprit who had housed her. I was told an Amber Alert was put out on me, and that turned out to be bullshit. My roommate's uncle had stopped by the house earlier and snooped around, which I later found out was because the cops had stopped by the place where he worked, asking about Mickia. We went and hid over at my roommate's mom's house, and as soon as I checked the internet for the Amber Alert, and they watched the TV for it, they called the parents of Mickia, and I think everything got worked out. I think she was staying with a new boyfriend she had or something. April 17th, 2007. I go to pick up Brandel to hang out. I had recently gotten my camcorder my mother had bought me for a Christmas birthday combo gift. I was born on January 15th, so I took it with me to film footage. Mickia was there, and I got to take footage of her, and then we dropped her off at her ex-boyfriend's house. But right before she got out, she gave me the last kiss I ever received from her to this day. May 2007. I can't put up with the adventures anymore, so I run away again. This time to Spokane, Washington, where my father has moved. I start calling Mickia, and it turns out her boyfriend went to jail for violating probation. So she starts talking to me more. I hadn't told her I lost my virginity to her. So finally I told her, and she said that was sweet that she was my first. Later, on AIM, she told me she wanted to marry me again. Now I have this thing about wanting my life to work out like a movie. I think it's caused by my OCD. I remember something Brandel told me in 2000 before I started dating his sister. He said to me, "You know what would be cool? If you married my sister." I guess I wanted that to be an auspicious sign of how my destiny would work out so perfectly. It didn't. While waiting for her to turn 18, she found another guy, and they got married. About a year or so later, they got a divorce, and now she's with another guy named Greg, last I heard. She refuses to even be my friend anymore, because when I brought my girlfriend with me to pick up Brandel while she was there with her boyfriend, I wouldn't talk to her much, because I felt awkward. I'm happy to say I finally moved on, after being obsessed with her for so many years.